Wei Jingwu, seeing off Zhou in evening rain. Drizzle on the Jiangsu River. A twilight bell from Yangwu. The sail of your boat hangs heavy, soaked with mist. In this gloomy weather, birds are leaving late. The river mouth is somewhere out of sight. All we see are glistening trees at the water's edge. Overcome by the sadness of farewell, our sleeves are doubly wet with rain and tears. So this is the last of Wei Jingwu's pentasyllabic regulated poems. The topic of this poem is pretty similar to the one we read yesterday. The one we read yesterday, if you remember, was about meeting an old friend from Liangzhou after having spent more than 10 years without seeing him. And so it was a combination. It was meeting and parting and remembering previous meetings and partings. This is a more pure example, if you wish, of the parting poem. Yeah, so seeing of Zhou. We don't have an explanation of where Zhou is going for the reasons of parting. Scholar officials tended to part for many reasons that we've mentioned in the past. So when they were exiled because their political coteries or cliques were defeated at court, they were sent to remote provinces as governors, or even when they were not punished, they were routinely sent for administrative posts as prefects, county magistrates, and other posts to remote parts of China, far away from the capital. So generally, when this happened, so the scholar officials would stage a farewell party for their friend, which would include wine drinking and poetry reading and composition of poems to commemorate and flatter the person who was going away. Remember what we've said lots of times, poetry, writing, reading is a social act among the scholar officials in China. So it was meant to be produced, if not on demand, at least it should be relatively easy to produce poems for these occasions. And these occasions also set the tone and the general subject matter of said poems. Parting is always a sad occasion. It evokes the sadness of parting from friends, but also the passage of time, the possibility of never meeting or of taking a long time to meet. And, we have those things in this poem. But those elements of sadness, of natural sadness and melancholy at the fact of parting, are generally intensified by Chinese correlative thought. We've talked about this a lot also in previous poems. Very briefly, remember that for Chinese traditional culture, basically from the Han Dynasty, philosophical developments, and those continued all through, at least in part, all through the imperial period, there is this idea that man and nature form a unity of sorts. There's a unity between the microcosm of humanity and of human social behavior and of the human body and the macrocosm of all heaven, all nature. And one of the ways in which this is explained is, for example, the fact that bad human actions in the social sphere provoke punishment from heaven, from nature in the natural sphere. So a bad ruler can cause, because of his bad deeds, earthquakes and natural disasters because he is a bad ruler. In fact, omens, like meteorites or natural catastrophes, should be taken as warnings by rulers. It's also the idea that nature reacts to humans. Yeah? So if a human is feeling sad, he extrapolates this sadness or extends this sadness as a contagion to nature, who acts as a resonating box. So in a poem like this, that is about being separated from a friend, a sad context, the poet creates a structure in which nature is also sad and is also crying and is also desolate at the parting. There is, in this case, there is a perfect parallelism between the sadness of the friends that are parting and the sadness of nature which is in its own way crying. It's probably, it's a rainy day. Rain is associated with tears all through the poem, but especially in the last line. And we live in a river-soaked, water-soaked kingdom of sadness and melancholy. Okay, so let's go into the details then. Okay, so as the title says, this is a poem about seeing off a friend in an evening, which is raining. Evening also is interesting because it's the decline of day, just as autumn or winter are generally the seasons in which these poems take place or are located, because autumn adds an extra pathos of falling leaves, of declining age and health, and bittersweet melancholy. Okay, as usual, let's go through the poem couplet by couplet. Drizzle on the Yangtze River, a twilight bell from Jianje. So the title of the poem located the genre of the poem, parting poem, and it introduced the fact that it was raining. The first couplet, which generally introduces the chronotope, that is the temporary and physical background of the poem, is quite illustrative here. So we get a couplet that introduces the rain, introduces a sound, and introduces two places. So drizzle on the Yangtze River. So we are in the Yangtze River, not specified specifically where. The next line will be a bit more concrete. And a twilight bell from Jianje. Jianje was the old name for what had been the southern capital of the southern dynasties during the period of disunion. It was destroyed, burned to the ground by the Shui dynasty, but it was later rebuilt in the Tang. It's a melancholy and sad location to be. I imagine that Yingwu was indeed close to Jianje when he composed this poem on the Yangtze, but especially appropriate because it includes connotations of past glories that have disappeared, the passage of time. So we're in the Yangtze River, close to the old city of Jianje, and two melancholy effects of nature are set in the scene. There is a drizzle that is falling on the river, water over water, a light rain, like tears from the sky, is falling on the water, pat, pat, pat. And there is a twilight bell from Jianje. So bells probably, this is probably referring to a Buddhist temple bell. They rang, I think, at different times of day, but especially at morning and at sunset. Buddhist bells, the sound of a Buddhist bell is always a symbol of impermanence, of the passage of things. It's a sad, dark, melancholy sound. So we get two images. One is visual, the drizzle on the river, although you could argue that it's also aural in a way, because the raindrops would make a sound patting on top of the river water. And there's an oral effect, the twilight bell sounding from the city and its temples. So these two elements, two natural elements, a vision of rain, a sound of a bell, on the Yangtze near Jianje, they create a more specific location than the title did, and they introduce already the sadness, the tears of nature, at the sadness of what is going to happen through the poem. Second couplet. The sail of your boat hangs heavy, soaked with mist. In this gloomy weather, birds are leaving late. So now we get to the specifics. Not only are we on the river, we might imagine that Zhou and Yingwu are, either each of them in a boat, or maybe one of them, probably Yingwu is on land, and the other, Zhou, is climbing on his boat, ready to leave. Well, whatever the case, we have a boat, and there are impediments for the movement. Yeah. And there's a double impediment. Again, there's you could say, an impediment. There are two natural impediments, but on the first line, the sail of the boat is heavy. It doesn't want to billow and to push the boat to take away Wei Jingwu's friend. The sails are soaked with mist. So we continue with this watery imagery. But here the main conceit is the obstacle for moving. The sail of the boat, as if it were a person also, doesn't want to move. It's too heavy to move. It doesn't want to move away. And in such a gloomy weather, the birds also are leaving late. Just as the sails of the boat do not want to billow and push the poet's friend away, the birds do not want to move away either. There's this, in this depressive, rainy, sad climate and context, there's no desire for moving away. Just as Yingwu and does not want to part from his friend, nature as a whole conspires in not wanting this to happen, or in at least lamenting and trying to obstaculize as much as possible this parting situation. The river mouth is somewhere out of sight. All we see are glistening trees at the water's edge. So I think here we have this looks like a quite descriptive couplet which describes what can be seen and what can't be seen. We might imagine a heavy rainfall. It's so heavy that one can't see much far off onto the river. All this water is hiding, among other things, the river mouth, where the river goes to. And the only thing that can be seen are, the trees nearby, just by the water's edge, and they're shiny from the rain, like bedewed or bejeweled by the beautiful rain, which is, it's a drizzle, so it's not a heavy rain. I take that away. But, it might be strong enough to make it difficult to see further ahead, nevertheless, even if it's not a heavy rain. Anyway, both images point at indeterminacy. Not only did we have in the previous couplet elements of nature or of mankind, a sail, inanimate elements, trying to block the movement, it's not clear where we're moving to, because, the mouth of the river cannot be seen. Only the trees nearby can be seen. And, this might have further connotations, like the future is uncertain and cannot be seen. Only this present, this glistening, beautiful present in which we two are together, like two shiny, beautiful trees next to the water, only this is real right now at the moment of composing this poem. Finally, the last couplet. The last couplet generally summarizes the main ideas or feelings of the poems. It recapitulates all that has been going on, all the images, all this background. And of course, the poem is about parting, so the poem must conclude with the consummation of the parting or the feelings of sadness that this parting has created. Overcome by the sadness of farewell, our sleeves are doubly wet with rain and tears. So up to now, this is also very typical in these Chinese poems. You get, it's like a cinematic zoom in. So from couplet to couplet, the picture, the camera seems to be getting more focused and more centered in detail. So first it's all nature, it's a geographical area. Then it's the region, specifically with the boat and the river, and parts of the boat and parts of the surrounding riverside. Then it's the river mouth and the trees that can be seen from nearby from the boat. And finally, it's the two protagonists of the poem, the poetic persona and his parting friend, and how they feel. They're overcome with sadness. So the sadness reaches a climax. And this inner climax shows in a final outer manifestation, which rhymes with the drizzling rain. The sleeves of the two are doubly wet with rain and tears. They're wet because it's raining, and they're wet because they're crying. This is a very, 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 very conventional image in Chinese poetry, and also in Japanese poetry, which took it from the Chinese. The sleeves of lovers, or in this case, the sleeves of friends, soaked by tears. Okay, I imagine, I feel it's adequate in that the poem has been building up this watery imagery and this sadness all through it. And, the climatic, wet, doubly wet sleeves from the rain and from the tears feel nice. They work properly in this poem. And You know, I'm not going to go into a debate about originality. The Western tradition has only valued originality of form and originality of subject matter in, let's say, the last 200 years since Romanticism. And our literary tradition has been quite conventional as well, and valuing following conventional and prescribed topics. But anyway, even though, as I said, the image of wet sleeps is pretty conventional in Chinese poetry, and you've encountered it in previous poems that I've read here, I think it has been properly built up in this poem, and it's pretty satisfactory.